Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, welcome to the awards presentation ceremony for the 2020 National Newspaper Awards. Bienvenue à la cérémonie de présentation des prix du Concours canadien de journalisme. I'm Marc Denis, honored to serve as your host for this event. Ici Marc Denis. Un plaisir d'être votre animateur pour cet événement. Ce n'est évidemment pas un gala traditionnel où des centaines de journalistes parmi les plus réputés au Canada sont réunis pour célébrer dans une chic salle de bal. Nous avons tous hâte au jour où il sera de nouveau possible de le faire, mais pour le moment, nous devons célébrer sur le web. Even though this is a virtual event, it is important to acknowledge that the home base for the NNAs is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Over the next hour or so, we will announce the winners of 22 categories, and at the end of the show, we will unveil the Journalist of the Year for 2020. Et que dire de tout le travail en nomination pour le concours cette année? Vraiment exceptionnel. Nos 66 juges ont dû sélectionner le Nec Plus Ultra parmi plus de 900 soumissions. Aussi, plusieurs personnes et organisations ont contribué à cet événement par le biais de leur commandite. Here are a few brief words from our sponsors.
Hi, I'm Pat Pellegrini, President and CEO of ViviData. ViviData has been providing audience research to magazines and newspapers for over 40 years. Our business has evolved to address significant changes in the media industry, but never more so than in the past 3 or 4 years. The rapid growth of digital has led publishers to look at new and innovative ways to reach Canadians. It's also led us to work with new partners as we find the best methods for delivering online and offline audiences. The consumer research ViviData offers can be used by any type of newspaper or media to profile audiences beyond just your readership. As an industry association, we see ourselves increasingly as advocates or ambassadors for media, helping you leverage your newspapers through world-class research. ViviData is leading the charge and will continue to deliver and develop insights on audiences, wherever they're consuming media. ViviData, know your audience.
As has been the case for the past couple of years, we have 7 awards named after important figures in Canadian journalism. We thank the sponsors of these awards for their support and recognition of the importance of quality journalism in our democracy. Voici donc un bref aperçu des grands noms qui ont été associés à ces prix. The George Brown Award for Investigations pays tribute to the founder of the Globe, who made it his mission to demand that governments apply both fairness and compliance with constitutional principles. George Brown's Globe of the 1800s set out accusations of corruption and double-dealing, and backed them up with hard evidence. This award honoring investigative journalism that afflicts the comfortable is sponsored by the Globe and Mail. The John Wesley Defoe Award for Politics honors the longtime editor of the Winnipeg Free Press, who is often called the greatest Canadian journalist of his time. During his 43 years as editor, the Free Press was considered one of the great newspapers of the world, and John Defoe's writing was required reading in the corridors of power. This award is sponsored by Ron Stern, majority owner of the Free Press. Le prix E. Cora Hind pour le journalisme spécialisé rend hommage à l'une des pionnières dans les annales du journalisme canadien. E. Cora Hind a été non seulement l'une des premières femmes à travailler comme reporter, mais elle a aussi participé au mouvement des suffragettes, contribuant à la lutte pour que les femmes obtiennent le droit de vote. Pertinemment, ce prix est commandité par le Nellie McClung Heritage Site. The Bob Levin Award for Short Feature pays tribute to a true writer's editor. Bob Levin understood the power of the story being told, and also the nuance of each word choice. Soft-spoken, thoughtful, and wise, Bob was the sort of editor every journalist wants, someone who could help you find the best expression of your story in a voice you never quite realized you had. This award is sponsored by the Globe and Mail. Le prix Claude Ryan pour l'éditorial rend hommage à un homme qui a eu une grande influence dans le monde du journalisme au Québec. Claude Ryan a été un directeur de grand renom du journal Le Devoir avant de devenir leader du Parti libéral du Québec et, à ce titre, chef du camp du non lors du référendum de 1980 sur la souveraineté. Ce prix est commandité par la famille Ryan. The William Sodom Award for Long Feature is in honor of a Canadian newspaper publisher who rose from a 12-year-old paperboy to founder of what became the country's first and largest newspaper group. His name lives on in the William Sodom Journalism Fellowships at the University of Toronto's Massey College. This award is sponsored by the Fisher, Bowen, and Balfour families. Le prix Norman Webster pour le reportage international rend hommage à un homme qui a eu une carrière influente remarquable au Globe and Mail. On se souvient plus particulièrement de Norman Webster pour sa couverture de la diplomatie du ping-pong au début des années 1970, quand les relations ont commencé à s'ouvrir entre la Chine et l'Occident. Ce prix est commandité par la famille Webster. And now, et maintenant, showtime! A team of Toronto Star journalists used graphics, maps, and enterprising analysis to upend assumptions about how COVID-19's first wave spread through Toronto. The piece mined an enormous database to show how mismanagement by health officials cost lives during the pandemic, and to reveal shocking new information, such as the fact that the first lockdown instantly flattened the transmission curve in rich, mostly white neighborhoods, yet did not have that effect in poor, more racialized ones. Judges called this a timely and significant report that transformed data from public health agencies into a readable, even suspenseful story. The journalists' creativity, both in presentation and in structuring their material, converted raw statistics into a compelling narrative. Les technologies de l'intelligence artificielle menacent la notion de vie privée individuelle. Pendant que les forces policières acquièrent et commencent à déployer la technologie de reconnaissance faciale, les autorités politiques ignorent largement les questions qu'elle soulève. La candidature de Tristan Péloquin de La Presse explique que ces questions sont manifestement réelles. La Presse a élaboré son propre programme de surveillance à partir d'un logiciel disponible sur l'Internet et en a fait l'essai sur une vidéo représentant des douzaines de députés et de leurs assistants déambulant à l'intérieur et dans les environs de l'Assemblée nationale. Ceci a démontré à quel point il est facile de s'immiscer dans la vie privée d'autrui. Les agences fédérales et provinciales de protection de la vie privée ont subséquemment entamé une vaste enquête sur l'utilisation des technologies biométriques. Les juges ont dit que la soumission explique de façon éloquente pourquoi cette technologie en évolution est une arme à double tranchant. In 2006, Ottawa created an official pandemic response plan designed to prepare for exactly the kind of situation Canada now finds itself in with COVID-19. Globe and Mail reporters Kathy Tomlinson and Grant Robertson mined several years of public health documents to ask a critical question in the early days of COVID-19. How well did the government follow its own plans? They provided compelling evidence that the plans were not followed when it mattered most, and that a multitude of credible warnings went unheeded. Judges said their analysis was outlined in a clear and accessible narrative that offered readers insight and a deeper understanding of why Canada seemed caught off guard by the COVID-19 pandemic with dire consequences. The award for explanatory work, le prix pour le texte explicatif, est décerné à de la presse, Tristan Péloquin. In a year of political, racial, and natural turmoil, few parts of the United States embodied the chaos more than Oregon. In solidly reported and colorful stories, Tom Blackwell of the National Post captured the state's unique role as an epicenter of human unrest and natural destruction. Although overshadowed at times by the pandemic and growing demands for an end to systemic racism, U.S. politics was one of the most important stories of 2020. Amidst saturation coverage of the dysfunction of American society and its elected leadership, Blackwell's grassroots reporting and graceful storytelling brought fresh eyes and new insights. Judges said he provided a very human element to help us understand why America is what it is. He has no illusions or ideology, just pure pragmatism. That quote about Vladimir Putin laid the foundation for an exhaustive exploration of Russia's leader. From Ukraine to Syria to the United States, the former KGB agent turned dictator has been arguably the most influential figure of the 21st century. Mustering the insight and intelligence of a wide range of sources cultivated over more than 2 decades covering Russia and Eastern Europe, the Globe and Mail's Marc McKinnon wrote compelling stories about Putin's rise to power and why he will never let go. Judges said the Globe's series provided a solid foundation for understanding more recent news about Russia, including the return of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. And they speculated that Putin himself has likely read McKinnon's deep and blunt analysis. Nathan Vanderklip of the Globe and Mail has been shining a light on the brutal treatment of the Muslim Uyghur minority in China's Xinjiang region. He gained access to an industrial complex accused of employing forced labor, a facility government officials had successfully blocked diplomats and other journalists from entering. To get in, Vanderklip pushed through people who sought to physically block his path and prevent him from capturing images. He also gave readers a chilling look inside the detention system in Xinjiang through messages and a video sent from a Uyghur model. Judges said Vanderklip was not only enterprising in his reporting, but wrote simply, clearly, and beautifully to expose egregious human rights violations that are worthy of the world's attention. Le prix Norman Webster pour le reportage international. The Norman Webster Award for International Reporting goes to, from the Globe and Mail, Nathan Vanderklip. On the day of the U.S. presidential election, newspapers faced a challenge: how to tell the story when there might not be a clear winner by deadline. Rather than use generic pictures of the two candidates, the Toronto Star's Bob Bishop came up with an idea to illustrate both the uncertain outcome and the division between red and blue states. Bishop fashioned a large question mark out of the geographic shapes of the 50 states and used color to indicate which way they voted, including gray states whose outcomes were unknown at press time. Judges said the core visual on the front page captured the uncertain answer to a question the entire world was asking: who will be the next president of the United States? At least 66,000 people have disappeared in Mexico since the start of a war on drugs 15 years ago. The Globe and Mail set out to tell the stories of families searching for the bodies of loved ones, hundreds of whom were buried in a clandestine grave. Telling the complex story required a vast array of techniques that could only have been accomplished in a multidimensional space where audio, video, photos, text, cartography, graphics, and 3D visualizations were sewn together with code. Drone photography was used, along with animation programs to triangulate locations. Judges said the 3-person design team presented a multitude of data clearly and simply, in both English and Spanish, to take readers on a journey through a nightmare of injustice. A Globe and Mail presentation team displayed the work of photographer Louis Pelloux at the Arctic Circle, both to bring about a compelling and seldom seen view of a remote part of the world to which many nations lay claim, and to show how Canada and its allies are bracing for an unknown future influenced by climate change. The goal of the presentation was to tell the story through the photographer's eyes, the themes he grappled with, and the challenges he faced while covering thousands of kilometers by land, air, and sea. Judges said a reader could feel the bitter cold through an engaging presentation composed of photos, videos, maps, and narrative voiceover. It's a fascinating story, told primarily through visuals. Le prix pour la présentation et conception graphique. The award for presentation and design goes to, from the Globe and Mail, for their work on Disappeared, Laura Blenkinsop, Jeremy Agius, and Timothy Moore. La COVID-19 a mis en évidence les inégalités à travers le Canada, comme peu d'autres événements de récente mémoire, en révélant des zones généralisées de vulnérabilité. Parmi les populations les plus vulnérables, on retrouve les demandeurs d'asile qui sont en quête d'une vie meilleure ici. Une série méticuleusement réalisée par Carla Meza du Devoir dresse le portrait de la vie des gens vivant en marge de la société canadienne, donnant la parole à ceux et celles qui gardent le silence parce qu'ils ont tout à perdre s'ils élèvent la voix. Il a fallu de la ténacité pour réaliser ce projet afin d'établir des relations et gagner la confiance des personnes vulnérables en situation précaire. Les juges ont dit que leurs voix font vibrer le reportage, qui donne un aperçu équilibré d'un problème généralisé. Helmut Oberlander crafted a comfortable life after arriving in Canada from Germany. He became a citizen, a subdivision developer, and a much-admired member of the community. And he was hiding a past that connected him to the slaughter of thousands of Jews and others in Eastern Europe during the Second World War. Terry Pender spent years tunneling into thousands of pages of secret records to uncover the story for the Waterloo Region Record, a news organization that operates in a city with a large German community. This is a remarkable look at how a member of a Nazi death squad managed to avoid deportation despite overwhelming evidence, much of it kept from public view. Saskatchewan is a province that was once overwhelmingly rural, and it is still viewed that way by the rest of Canada. Yet, 2/3 of its residents now live in cities. Abandoned Saskatchewan is an impressive effort to come to grips with the profound metamorphosis of a province that is proud of its rural roots, but increasingly urban. Saskatoon Star Phoenix journalists take a deeply personal and moving dive into the massive abandonment of rural life for a large part of the province, while First Nations have been able to rebuild part of their territory. Judges called this a rich, immersive project with thorough reporting and compelling storytelling, the kind of project that can be accomplished when a news organization truly understands its community. Le prix du reportage à caractère local, the award for local reporting goes to the Saskatoon Star Phoenix. Dave Scott Thomas was the most powerful person in Canadian track and field, the head of a university program, and the secret weapon behind several successful Olympic athletes. He also engaged in sexual, psychological, and physical abuse of athletes, a fact that was kept quiet by enablers at the University of Guelph and the National Track and Field Program. Michael Doyle's deep, sensitively handled investigation for the Globe and Mail brought it all to light. The abuse, the repeated cover-ups, and the fallout for individuals who had tried to blow the whistle. The story led to the coach being banned for life from the sport, and Athletics Canada has now implemented a whistleblower program. Judges called it an amazing work of investigative journalism. Columns about curling, Maradona, and the banality of athlete interviews are a showcase for the breadth of subject matter and opinion offered to readers by the Globe and Mail's Cathal Kelly. The Briar Curling Tournament, he writes, exists in that weird and vanishing space between the cult of amateurism and the big time. While Maradona may have perfected how soccer is played, Kelly writes, he had a tough time figuring out everything else in life. Athletes facing media scrutiny are now more closely observed than zoo animals, he notes. Judges said Kelly offers everything you'd want from a sports columnist: an original voice, consistent excellence, and brilliant insights. Viewers of APTN's Hometown Hockey in Cree are treated to a television production like no other. On what other broadcast would the host open by saying, "Good evening, my loved ones"? Melissa Martin of the Winnipeg Free Press tells the story of the Cree broadcast. Its characters, its impact, how it came about, bringing life to every last detail. Judges called it a story about the incredible cultural power of sport and its ability to both affirm and bind a community, a zeitgeist piece worthy of great praise. This story, they said, meets all the expectations of a sports feature and then delivers several more, including a ton of hope. Le prix pour le sport, the award for sports, goes to, from the Globe and Mail, Michael Doyle. COVID-19 took a toll in many ways, one of which was the enforced separation of families from loved ones in long-term care facilities. Veronica Henry of the Toronto Sun vividly illustrated this in her photograph showing a woman reaching for her daughter at a closed window. The image captured the sorrow, loneliness, helplessness, and fear of a mother not knowing if she would ever again be able to embrace her child. It spoke to the pain and anguish of separation, and put a human face on the toll COVID took on residents of care homes. An extremely powerful moment and a very complicated story told in a single image. Une personne revêtue d'une combinaison hazmat évoque les images d'un film d'horreur. Mais c'est la vraie vie dans un centre de soins de longue durée au Québec en mai dernier, durant la première vague de COVID-19. Il y a tant d'éléments dans cette photo de Jacques Nadeau du Devoir. Les deux résidents alités, l'un sous oxygène, les plateaux de nourriture non entamés, l'air résigné sur le visage reflété dans le verre. La photo démontre comment la COVID-19 a affecté de si nombreux résidents âgés des foyers de soins, leurs familles et le personnel soignant. C'est un résumé déchirant de la pandémie capté dans un seul cliché, une nature morte illustrant la maladie au seuil de la mort. Never have the differences between how Canada and the United States dealt with COVID-19 been more apparent than in this image taken by Carlos Osorio of Reuters. The tight framing allows the viewer to compare two Niagara River tour boats during the height of the pandemic. The Canadian boat, easily identified by the flags, has 5 people on board, 1 below the temporarily imposed limit of 6. The U.S. boat, which was supposed to be limited to 50% capacity, is jammed full of people, with no attempt at physical distancing. This photo, both funny and not so funny, made all 3 judges shake their heads. The award for General News Photo, le prix pour la photo d'actualité générale, est décerné à Le Devoir, Jacques Nadeau. The collapse of Nortel still reverberates years later. Was it poor management, an inability to compete with China's Huawei, or something else? Tom Blackwell of the National Post connected the dots, weaving a compelling tale about how industrial espionage undermined Nortel and aided Huawei's global rise. Huawei's CFO is the subject of extradition hearings in Canada, and her arrest led to the imprisonment of 2 Canadians in China. Blackwell dug deeper into the connection, noting that Huawei accepted millions of dollars in government grants while bidding to participate in Canada's rollout of next-generation wireless technology, and while partnering with Canadian universities. Judges said the story presented fresh evidence and brought a new perspective to Nortel's stunning downfall. This entry shines a light on the essential workers who put food on our tables even during the pandemic. Supported by a wide array of sources, 3 Globe and Mail journalists clearly explain how the health and safety of some workers in Canada's food supply chain were compromised as the pandemic escalated. The writing evoked compassion through extensive first-person interviews and exposed the appalling circumstances in 2 workplaces where COVID-19 proliferated. The human cost to meat packers in Alberta and commercial farm workers in Ontario was clearly shown as producers kept supply lines running without providing adequate protection for employees. The stories ultimately forced the federal government to safeguard the health of these often invisible workers. As COVID-19 ravaged long-term care homes, a team of Toronto Star journalists discovered that people living in for-profit residences fared worse than those in publicly owned or non-profit homes. The reporters analyzed hard-to-obtain data ranging from infection and death rates to staffing levels and spending priorities. Shockingly, they found that death rates due to COVID-19 were higher in for-profit homes than in other types of long-term care residences. They also revealed that while large for-profit chains received millions in COVID-19 relief funding, they also paid shareholders millions in dividends. The authoritative accounts explored the design, operating principles, and impact of different models of care. Judges described this as a commendable examination of how we care for our most fragile and vulnerable citizens. Le prix pour l'économie, the award for business, goes to, from the Toronto Star, Kenyon Wallace, Marco Chown-Ovid, Ed Tubb, and Brendan Kennedy. Julie Strite is one of the people you didn't hear much about during the first wave of the pandemic. She was sitting beside beds in the long-term care home where she worked, holding hands and praying with people when they died. Busy nurses and overwhelmed personal support workers called on her so that residents didn't have to spend their last moments alone. Aaron Anderson's compelling story, told in simple language, describes Strite's efforts to ease the final days of isolated residents and her struggle against exhaustion and despair. Judges said this was emotive without being sappy, a beautifully crafted, enterprising, and moving portrait of an individual's quiet heroism. Louise Dixon's heartbreaking story about Judith Stewart's unrelenting efforts to save her drug-addicted son reminds readers that behind the overuse of opioids are people and families struggling to survive. The grieving mother believes the pandemic may have affected his regular drug supply, and she still blames herself, wondering if there was something else she might have done to save him. A moment when the mother reached down and touched her son's face after discovering him passed out in a doorway is a central, powerful image in Dixon's story, which combines graceful writing with an economy of words. When Manitoba shut all sports facilities and activities because of COVID-19, parents scrambled to find a place for their next Sidney Crosby or Hayley Wickenheiser to keep playing. With humor and clever hockey analogies, Ben Waldman turned a focus on one family's effort to salvage the season into a look at efforts across Winnipeg and Canada to maintain touchstones in a world turned upside down. Erecting boards and flooding backyards gave families a much-needed break from the endless stream of pandemic news, turning their personal rinks into refuges. The enthusiasm of families creatively responding to COVID-19 shines through in this well-researched and finely crafted tale. Le prix Bob Levin pour le reportage bref. The Bob Levin Award for Short Feature goes to, From the Globe and Mail, Aaron Anderson. The federal government's planned contract with We Charity for a youth entrepreneurship program sparked the biggest political uproar of 2020. It led to an apology from the Prime Minister, the resignation of the Finance Minister, and a decision to prorogue Parliament. A Globe and Mail team dug into both the public policy questions the issue raised and the charity itself, regularly breaking exclusive stories. The reporting undermined We's claims that it would not benefit from the contract, shed light on conflict of interest, illustrated dubious practices, and raised questions about governance. Judges said this was seminal and important work that provided key information for Canadians to make up their own minds about We's activities. At a time of growing public appetite for police reform, columnist Dan Fumano's stories in the Vancouver Sun about the intersection between City Hall and the police department helped set the political agenda in Vancouver. The police chief's assertion to Fumano that there was no systemic racism in the department and that suggesting otherwise was offensive was quickly followed by the mayor's blunt dismissal of that viewpoint. That led the columnist to track down hundreds of pages of documents revealing how allegations of police racism and misconduct came to be deleted from an ostensibly independent review of the department. Fumano's reporting triggered an investigation into whether the Vancouver Police Board operates with sufficient independence from the department. Même s'il était pratiquement inconnu du grand public, l'homme d'affaires Marc a été pendant des années l'éminence grise du premier ministre Jean Charest, un personnage puissant et influent aux opinions bien tranchées. Pour en savoir plus long sur l'homme de l'ombre, 3 journalistes de la presse ont parlé à des douzaines de sources et passé en revue des centaines de pages de documents. Ils ont dressé un portrait remarquable d'un homme dont le règne, comme grand argentier du Parti libéral du Québec, s'est étendu sur près de 5 décennies. Il est souvent difficile d'obtenir même l'information de base sur les personnes qui, en coulisses, détiennent le réel pouvoir en politique. Mais l'équipe de La Presse a réussi à nous éclairer sur la façon dont le pouvoir est exercé derrière la scène. Le prix John Wesley Defoe pour la politique. The John Wesley Defoe Award for Politics goes to, from the Globe and Mail, Bill Curry, Marika Walsh, Paul Waldy, Jeffrey York, and Jaron Kerr. The Black Lives Matter movement protesting racism, injustice, and police brutality against black people swept through North America in the spring and summer of 2020, while capturing attention around the world. Many protests were peaceful, but violence flared on occasion. Canadian press photographer Daryl Dick captured one such moment in Vancouver when a man became incensed after another man wearing a BLM hoodie spray-painted those 3 powerful letters onto the side of a building. Judges said the visual conveyed a highly symbolic message. The deadliest mass murder in modern Canadian history abruptly ended at a gas station outside Enfield, Nova Scotia, last April. Police shot and killed Gabriel Wertman after he had murdered 22 individuals and injured 3 others in a 13-hour killing rampage. Canadian press photographer Andrew Vaughan managed to get to the remote location and capture an image of the lifeless killer. Despite a general policy not to showcase graphic images of death, the news agency transmitted this photograph along with other less gruesome photos from the scene. Judges said this was a powerful image from one of 2020's most shocking stories, captured under difficult conditions. COVID-19 has killed more than 2 million people, devastated economies, and caused unbearable hardships at every level of society around the globe. This image by Canadian press photographer Chris Young illustrates the grief and sense of loss felt by a homeless man in downtown Toronto as city workers moved to clear an encampment, which had been his home. Young, who has developed strong connections within the city's homeless community, received a tip that the raid was about to take place. Judges called this photograph a raw image that vividly informed viewers how the pandemic could affect those on the margins of society. Le prix pour la photo de la nouvelle de dernière heure. The award for breaking news photo goes to, from the Canadian Press, Andrew Vaughn. Aaron Defoe of the Montreal Gazette permanently changed the public narrative about the pandemic in Quebec. His stories about Heron residents shocked Quebec and the rest of Canada, prompting Premier François Legault to order the spot inspection of 40 privately run long-term care centres, to request a police investigation, and to hire nearly 7,000 orderlies to care for the elderly across the province. Defoe's dogged reporting, exposing neglect and the subsequent cover-up, was backed up by numerous sources and voluminous documentation. He also covered the larger picture, with a story about delayed cancer treatments and diagnoses resulting from the pandemic, and about the Premier's frustration with slow and inadequate data reporting. Even a French-language newspaper headline thanked him for speaking truth to power. Leah Gerber of the Waterloo Region Record covers the environment, specifically the Grand River watershed. She spins compelling narratives on the history of a heritage tree, scientists studying mussels for signs of revival in a dead zone in the river, and a town without drinkable water for more than 30 years. Judges said Gerber's singular approach to covering the relationship between humans and the natural world brings insight and provokes deep reflection. By giving personhood to trees and water, or chronicling the long-term effects of poisoned water on a community's life, she evokes a sense of mutuality that is rarely found in daily journalism. Her perspective brings the reader to new ways of understanding our relationship with the environment. Parmi les nombreux reportages superbes sur la COVID-19, le travail d'Ariane Lacourcière se distingue par son immédiateté, sa clarté et son habileté à créer de l'empathie chez le lecteur. Ces articles ne sont pas seulement captivants à lire, ils ont un impact. Certains des reportages d'Ariane Lacourcière ont amené le gouvernement québécois à faire d'importants changements à la façon dont il traite la pandémie. On peut seulement imaginer à quel point il a été difficile pour elle d'entrer dans un hôpital pour un reportage afin de raconter une journée au temps de la pandémie. Les juges ont dit que grâce à sa maîtrise du métier, elle évoque ces heures avec un fin mélange de récits et de faits, en décrivant non seulement les ravages de la pandémie, mais en offrant un aperçu sur la façon dont nous pourrions mieux composer avec ses conséquences. The E. Cora Hind Award for Beat Reporting. Le prix E. Cora Hind pour le journalisme spécialisé est décerné à de la presse, Ariane Lacourcière. Les témoignages de 9 femmes qui ont rencontré l'humoriste Julien Lacroix au cours des ans mettent en évidence les conséquences persistantes des agressions sexuelles et la façon dont les abuseurs profitent de leur notoriété. Amélie Pineda, du Devoir, a bien décrit les expériences de ces femmes, leur sentiment de culpabilité et leur vulnérabilité émotionnelle après les agressions alléguées par l'une des figures montantes de la scène de l'humour au Québec. Figure qui jouait aussi un rôle de modèle pour les adolescents. Amélie Pineda n'a pas seulement rapporté les témoignages de ces femmes, mais elle a aussi travaillé indépendamment à les corroborer, en les validant soigneusement auprès d'amis et de parents. Les juges ont dit qu'Amélie Pineda a tenu une vedette montante responsable de ses actes, tout en évitant de victimiser ses sources une nouvelle fois. Johanna Schneller writes nuanced columns that combine personal experiences and vulnerabilities with social observations and humor. She is not afraid to challenge readers. One story in her entry explored why men don't embrace movies directed by women. Another re-examined one of Canada's most beloved icons, Leonard Cohen, with Schneller torn between admiration of his art and utter distaste for how he treated women. A third considered the trope of rape in TV crime shows, identifying the stereotypes often put on the screen, and how the perspective changes when women are involved in creating the shows. Judges said Schneller's columns are carefully constructed, beautifully written, and offer ideas the reader likely has not encountered elsewhere. Qui dans son enfance n'a pas rêvé de s'enfuir pour se joindre à un cirque, ou, en colère, a menacé de le faire à l'occasion? L'enquête approfondie de Jean Siag soulève la toile du grand chapiteau pour dévoiler les sérieux problèmes qui sont dénoncés au sein de cette industrie, qui nous apparaît tout aussi mystérieuse qu'exotique. Le point de départ de ce reportage était le harcèlement sexuel, mais Jean Siag a aussi découvert des problèmes de travail contractuels précaires, dans un secteur où plusieurs artistes sont pigistes. Il a dû gagner la confiance de personnes qui travaillent dans l'anonymat, jouant souvent masqué ou le visage peint. Son travail a donné des résultats. Le Cirque du Soleil a consenti à verser des indemnités aux employés qui n'étaient pas admissibles à l'assurance-emploi. Le prix pour la culture, the award for arts and entertainment goes to, from the Globe and Mail, Johanna Schneller. Isabelle Haché écrit avec vigueur et éloquence. Sa candidature comprend des chroniques sur 3 sujets d'actualité très différents. Qu'elle aborde les Mohawks de Ganawagé, le mouvement Moi aussi ou le décès à l'hôpital d'une autochtone qui a été l'objet d'insultes racistes, Isabelle Haché a été en mesure d'éliminer les couches de désinformation et de méfiance qui se sont infiltrées dans la société. Elle n'a pas craint de prendre des positions impopulaires. Avec un brin de sarcasme, elle a démoli les faussetés à la mode et s'est portée à la défense des sans-voix. Les juges ont dit que le style éclectique d'Isabelle Haché rehausse son habileté à traiter d'un vaste éventail de sujets. André Picard's columns about COVID-19 in the Globe and Mail displayed timelessness and foresight. As a new normal crept in and continued to be redefined, Picard, in some ways, set the national agenda for how life should unfold during the pandemic. He identified, ahead of many scientists and political leaders, the importance of physical distancing. He called for Canadians to consider broader community needs, instead of just their own, to properly tackle COVID. And he tugged at our collective conscience by pulling back the curtain on intolerable conditions and organizational failures in Canada's nursing homes that led to unnecessary and predictable repeat infections and loss of life. Richard Warnicka's assignment for the National Post was to write regular columns not about the politics of COVID-19 per se, but about the feel of it, the dislocation of lockdown, the fear, the anxiety, the anguish. He endeavored to make readers feel less alone and to let them know it was okay not to be okay. Warnicka wrote about the modern human experience with rare eloquence and poetic language. Judges said his columns shone a light on the loneliness and fatigue so many felt because of the pandemic, bringing people together in spirit even while they remained so far apart. Le prix de la chronique, the award for columns, goes to, from the Globe and Mail, André Picard. « 5 jours en zone rouge » par Isabelle Haché de La Presse nous plonge au cœur de la tragédie de la COVID-19 de façon originale, captivante et courageuse. Répondant à l'appel à l'aide du gouvernement québécois devant le fléau d'infection dans les centres de soins de longue durée, Isabelle Haché s'est engagée comme assistante dans un CHSLD, ce qui lui a permis de voir de ses propres yeux les défis qu'il a fallu surmonter dès les premiers jours de la pandémie. Elle a été témoin de l'horreur d'une nouvelle maladie peu connue et de la gentillesse du personnel soignant, à la fois émouvant et troublant, Son article permet au lecteur de vivre l'expérience d'un séjour dans un centre de soins de longue durée de façon saisissante et touchante. Les juges ont dit qu'il s'agissait d'un exemple de bravoure qui a donné lieu à un reportage percutant. It's Not Good News charts Roger Levesque's surreal journey after receiving a diagnosis of inoperable cancer in a year when death was all around. Thinking he had food poisoning, Levesque was told he actually had cancer, a diagnosis he had heard before as an actor filming segments that helped train doctors on bedside manner. Judges said the feature beautifully captured Levesque's vulnerability and ultimate acceptance of his circumstance, without being maudlin or self-pitying. It also offered a fascinating glimpse of the impact COVID-19 has had on other parts of the healthcare system. This was an up-close and personal look at someone considering his own imminent death, told with grace, dark wit, and raw emotion. He Said, They Said, Inside the Trial of Matthew McKnight, was an in-depth look at how a case involving 13 counts of sexual assault would play out in court and what that could tell us in a broader sense about how the justice system grapples with sex crimes. Starting with high drama, the moments before a verdict was announced, Janet G. Pruden of the Globe and Mail expertly wove in details of the crimes, the key participants in the case, the broader Me Too movement, and finally, the reactions of the young women who lived through their ordeals again and again as they sought justice. Judges said Pruden's exceptional storytelling effectively unfurled a complicated case and shed new light on a timely subject. The William Sodom Award for Long Feature. Le prix William Sodom pour le reportage élaboré est décerné à De la presse, Isabelle Haché. La skieuse canadienne Berkeley Brown a mal calculé son deuxième saut à la Coupe du monde à Mont-Tremblant et s'est retrouvée en fâcheuse position. Le photographe de la presse canadienne Jacques Boissineau a eu le réflexe et l'habileté de fixer ce moment dans le temps. L'image représente la skieuse, un ski et ses lunettes épars, juste avant l'impact. Les juges ont souligné l'excellence de l'image, parfaitement exposée pour capter le blanc sur blanc. This powerful collision left the Carolina Hurricanes without a goalie, triggering a bizarre saga in which a practice goalie had to go into the net for half an NHL game. CP photographer Frank Gunn captured the instant that led to worldwide coverage as Kyle Clifford smashes into Peter Mrazek. Even without the big story that followed, this photo stands on its own merits. Clifford's skate in the air and Mrazek's flying helmet show the energetic momentum frozen in time and space. From the looks on the faces in the background, you sense the anticipation before both players slam to the ice. Kira Christmas faced the daunting challenge of staying ready to compete in water polo if the Summer Olympics went ahead despite COVID-19. Using hay bales and tarps, Christmas created a makeshift pool on her parents' farm. Leah Hennell's creative image for the Globe and Mail shows Christmas emerging from the water, framed by water polo nets and a rolling prairie sky, isolated from the energy of team camaraderie. The picture encapsulates an athlete's determination, ingenuity, and resolve in the face of unprecedented challenges brought on by a global pandemic. Le prix pour la photo de sport. The award for sports photo goes to... From the Globe and Mail, Leah Hennell. Every new arrival in federal prison has to take a test. A low score lands the prisoner in comfortable minimum security. A high score means uncomfortable maximum security. These so-called risk scores, the Globe and Mail's Tom Cardoso uncovered, are systemically biased against Indigenous, Black, and female prisoners. And Correctional Service Canada has known this for nearly 2 decades. Through meticulous research woven through a compelling narrative, Cardoso reported that the length of imprisonment often boils down to the color of inmates' skin and their ethnic origin. It's all because of a system that knowingly miscalculated inmate risk scores and overestimated the likelihood of inmates reoffending. Judges said Cardoso exposed a dark corner of the Canadian justice system. He showed the consequences in lives lost and wasted of bad policy and made a case that should outrage readers. Rachel Mendelson and Wendy Gillis of the Toronto Star wanted to find out how much physical force police officers use against Canadian citizens. What their exhaustive reporting uncovered was alarming. It's impossible to know, and a lack of accountability on the use of force by police contributes to systemic racism. Mendelson and Gillis found that Ontario and some other provinces don't track incidents in which police punch, kick, or body slam citizens unless the physical force causes an injury requiring medical attention. And they discovered that these uses of force disproportionately affect racialized communities. Judges said this was a compelling investigation into a lack of accountability on the use of force and police violence, and how it contributes to institutional racism. The reporters asked a smart question and turned the answer into a compelling story that is national in scope. After the deadly SARS outbreak in 2003, Canada invested many years and significant funds into pandemic preparedness to ensure the country was ready if another crisis came. Yet, when COVID-19 struck, Ottawa was caught off guard, with the government repeatedly insisting the outbreak posed only a low risk to Canada. The Globe and Mail's Grant Robertson uncovered significant evidence that the government was unprepared for the crisis because its early warning system, the Global Public Health Intelligence Network, was no longer functional and thus unable to carry out its mission. By exposing the shutting down of the system, Robertson's reporting had real impact. His work triggered probes by Canada's Auditor General and Health Minister, caused 3 senior government officials to be shuffled aside, and most importantly, led to the intelligence network being revived 440 days after it was shut down. Le Prix George Brown pour Grande Enquête. The George Brown Award for Investigations goes to, from the Globe and Mail, Tom Cardoso. Michael DeAdder's sharp editorial instincts are bang on. 22 pairs of footwear tug at the heartstrings after one of the worst killing rampages in history. As the struggle for racial justice erupted, DeAdder suggested most racist incidents are not reported but still exist just below the surface. He also captured 2020's perfect storm, the global pandemic plus Donald Trump's narcissism. His depiction of Trump complaining about the media to a dying ICU patient is a withering commentary on a complacent president who failed to manage a deadly virus while enabling conspiracy theorists. Graham McKay captures the zeitgeist in cartoons that have an edgy, clear-eyed originality. He is wise and unpredictable, sending up dysfunctional politics and pandemic mismanagement with controlled lunacy. McKay skewers his targets with a sure grasp of satirical fantasy. Giant soldiers dismantling a long-term care facility has a Swiftian touch. The Kielburger brothers, happily selling Wee Burgers, offers a meaty take on their endeavors. Doug Ford, turning his back on the Yahoos, is laser-sharp in nailing the Ontario Premier's efforts to distance himself from his erstwhile conservative buddies. Bruce McKinnon shows a rare mastery using symbols to highlight realities, as in his drawing of Earth as a prisoner chained to the coronavirus spiky ball, or the Nova Scotia flag shedding airborne doves to mourn the victims of last April's killing rampage. With finesse and elegance, McKinnon distills situations to their essence in a way that is at once dark and realistic. His depiction of Donald Trump as a track athlete raising his arms in victory just before the finish line as Joe Biden crosses it is a spot-on zinger. Absurd, funny, true, and brilliant. Le Prix pour la caricature. The award for editorial cartooning goes to From the Halifax Chronicle Herald and Toronto Star, Michael Dieter. La recherche et l'écriture incisive de François Cardinal rendent les lecteurs aussi impatients qu'il l'est lui-même de voir des mesures concrètes rapidement mises en place. Il réussit à démontrer qu'il est urgent d'agir en matière de racisme systémique et que cela sera largement appuyé. À l'aide de références aux facteurs historiques et sociologiques propres au Québec, l'éditorialiste de La Presse souligne d'importants éléments dont on doit tenir compte, sans se montrer trop didactique. L'avertissement pressant et bien étayé de François Cardinal au gouvernement fédéral à propos de l'incidence de l'affaire Meng Wanzhou sur les relations du Canada avec la Chine, ainsi que sa dénonciation de la culture du bannissement chez les progressistes, informe et persuade à la fois. Through a heartfelt editorial tribute to a local Indigenous musician's hunger strike for suicide awareness, Heather Person of the Saskatoon Star Phoenix and Regina Leader Post quietly but strikingly makes her point that the province must address the issue. This same humanity and compassion shine through in her eloquent appeal to readers to embrace education over humiliation in dealing with COVID-19 precautions. In response to the infamous death of George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis, Person makes a powerful case for Saskatchewan to implement civilian oversight of police, something she describes as long overdue. Ryan Stelter of the Kenora Miner and News grabs readers by the proverbial lapels and forces them to confront their own behavior and biases. This is not a comfortable or soothing approach, and it won't elicit the silent nods of agreement that editorials often do. Speaking personally but clearly about the need for the community to come together against racism, Stelter holds up a mirror to readers and challenges them to honestly assess the reflection. In editorials calling for the resignation of a local senator and urging local tolerance of out-of-province visitors mid-pandemic, he marshals the community's interests and commands the reader's attention. Le Prix Claude Ryan pour l'éditorial. The Claude Ryan Award for editorial writing goes to, from the Kenora Miner and News, Ryan Stelter. A horrific killing rampage last April posed tremendous challenges for news organizations. It unfolded with sketchy and at times erroneous information from authorities in a remote part of Nova Scotia. The Canadian press met the challenge, assembling and transmitting a steady and expansive stream of fact-based coverage that judges called a textbook example of how to cover breaking news on the fly. Courage was required to drive toward a rampaging gunman, especially in the middle of a pandemic, but the results show what can be obtained through on-the-ground reporting. Relentless questioning by CP's journalists uncovered that a firearms complaint was more serious than initially described, and that when police said a suspect was in custody, he was actually dead. Within hours, CP's reporting raised questions about transparency and accountability that would haunt the RCMP and lead to a public inquiry. When Ukraine Flight 752 went down last January in Iran, killing all 176 aboard, no one knew the impact the crash would have on Canada. Soon, a Globe and Mail team provided detailed reports, alerting readers to the fact that a seemingly far-off event was also a Canadian tragedy. Led by Marc McKinnon's dogged reporting, the Globe team was painstakingly thorough and compassionate in identifying the victims, piecing together their stories, reporting on the cause of the crash, and delving into the geopolitical impact of Iranian missiles shooting down a passenger jet. A stunning and eloquent compilation of the crash victims captured the heartbreak. Judges said the depth, breadth, and quality of the early reporting, covering multiple facets of the incident, gave readers a real sense of the impact this event had on Canada. There was initially no way to know that Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, blasted out of the sky over Tehran, would become a national tragedy 10,000 kilometers away in Canada. Within hours, Toronto Star journalists were meticulously reporting on a disaster that hit this country hard, not just in the number of deaths of Canadian citizens or residents, but in networks of community grief. Judges said the Star's coverage provided comprehensive and emotional insight into the pain and anguish felt by loved ones in the immediacy of the tragedy. It also addressed a wide range of issues that helped explain its ramifications. The package included moving testimonials, let readers know the victims through informative mini-profiles, and provided in-depth explanations of the potential political fallout from a disaster that shocked the country and indeed the world. Le prix pour la nouvelle de dernière heure. The award for breaking news goes to the Canadian Press. Last year was filled with sadness and loss for many, and we were drowned by images that reflected desolation, confinement, and solitude. Nathan Dennett's photo for the Canadian Press of a woman clutching her mother through a hug glove she invented so the family could embrace, despite COVID-19 restrictions, captures both the need for human touch and the despair of isolation experienced by so many during the pandemic. Judges said the women's faces show the joy of being able to experience something as simple as a hug, something we all need, and until 2020 might have taken for granted. COVID-19 caused all kinds of changes to how we live. One of them was being prevented from spending time together inside restaurants. Steve Russell of the Toronto Star found one couple's way of coping with the restrictions as they sipped wine on an outdoor patio, despite heavy rainfall. The dark, damp atmosphere and the glowing lights around the pair highlighted the need for both social distancing and together time. Judges called it a beautiful, moody, and unique image, with subtle colors and powerful lighting that evoke a feeling of isolation. A paddleboarder out for an early morning paddle on the Trent Severn Waterway produced a stunning photograph captured by Fred Thornhill for the Canadian Press. The image is reminiscent of the work of Vittorio Storaro, the cinematographer who designed the visual look of Apocalypse Now. Judges said the beautiful composition and light contributed to a photo you could hang on a wall and never tire of looking at. It takes, they said, a romantic heart to capture such an image. Le prix pour la photo de reportage. The award for feature photo goes to, from the Canadian Press, Nathan Dennett. The Mi'kmaq's push to pursue a fishery that would provide a moderate livelihood, as required by Supreme Court rulings, led to violence on land and in the water in 2020. Aaron Beswick of the Halifax Chronicle-Herald set out to provide context and analysis of what was happening. He shed light on the complex social, economic, political, historic, and legal context of this struggle, and gave readers a deep insight into the motivations and viewpoints of those involved. These included First Nations leaders, commercial fishermen, bureaucrats, scientists, and politicians. Traversing the province and writing on location, sometimes in his car, on wharves, even on a fishing boat, Beswick provided what judges called a brilliant example of sustained coverage by a single enterprising reporter. The horror and the humanity of COVID-19's rampage through long-term care facilities was the subject of a months-long collective effort by the Globe and Mail. Quickly recognizing a crisis in the making, the newspaper assembled a team of reporters to examine the deadly threat facing one of the country's most vulnerable populations. Their work, in more than 200 stories, 8 of them submitted with this entry, combined meticulous research, exhaustive interviewing, and finely crafted storytelling. The journalists illuminated failures, told harrowing personal stories, and reported on changes being made to reduce the toll in COVID's second wave. Judges called it an outstanding example of what's possible when a news organization marshals its resources to shine a light on a matter of profound importance. Les centres de soins de longue durée se situaient dans l'angle mort du gouvernement québécois au début de la pandémie. Voyant se dessiner un désastre, la presse a mis sur pied une équipe pour examiner la situation de près. Il s'en est suivi une grande variété de reportages qui ont mis en lumière les circonstances troublantes prévalant dans certains foyers, plus particulièrement des révélations horrifiantes concernant une institution en particulier. Les journalistes de la presse ont exercé un degré soutenu de surveillance des opérations des centres de soins prolongés et de la supervision gouvernementale de ce secteur. Ils ont démontré l'impact de la pandémie sur les personnes décédées, sur celles qui ont été laissées pour compte et sur le personnel soignant. Ils ont ainsi fourni aux lecteurs les éléments humains de la situation, de même que des révélations terrifiantes. Les juges ont dit que le travail avait été courageux, frappant et terrifiant. Le prix pour le reportage soutenu, the award for sustained news coverage goes to the Globe and Mail. L'un des plus grands bouleversements de l'histoire moderne a été la pandémie qui a frappé le monde en 2020. Alors que la COVID-19 affectait la vie de tous, les gens avaient besoin d'informations exactes au moment opportun. Les organes de presse ont dû adapter leur couverture pour suivre une cible mobile, alors que ce qui était vrai un jour pouvait être démenti le lendemain par les autorités. Le Devoir a affecté sa salle de rédaction en entier pour couvrir toutes les facettes du phénomène et son impact sur les Québécois. Les juges ont dit que le journal avait accompli un tour de force avec une couverture qui était instructive, exacte, originale et diverse, tout en donnant un visage humain aux conséquences de la pandémie. Malgré des ressources limitées, Le Devoir a fourni à ses lecteurs l'information dont ils avaient besoin pour prendre d'importantes décisions. On n'a pas le temps d'arrêter tout le monde. C'est juste une inondation de personnes qui regardent des enfants se faire violer puis qui aiment ça. Avec cette citation effrayante, la presse a dit à ses lecteurs à quel point les abus sexuels en ligne contre les enfants continuaient à augmenter. Alors que la salle de rédaction, comme toutes les autres, devait se concentrer sur la COVID-19 l'an dernier, le journal a aussi fait enquête sur le fléau en pleine croissance de la pornographie infantile sur l'Internet. En utilisant des techniques d'enquête avancées, les reporters Gabrielle Duchesne et Caroline Touzan ont révélé comment les prédateurs ont échangé des conseils en ligne pour tirer profit de la pandémie, lorsque les jeunes sont rivés à leurs écrans. Elles ont aussi démontré à quel point les forces policières étaient débordées en tentant de combattre une telle exploitation des mineurs. Et ils ont illustré les coups personnels subis par les enfants et leurs familles. In covering the life and death story of COVID-19, classic journalistic values of aggressive questioning, resourcefulness, and holding those in power to account were needed. The Toronto Star reinvented its newsroom to offer readers a lifeline of information and guidance to help them cope with the worst health disaster Canada has ever faced. Mobilizing all of its resources, the Star consistently dug up information that was not readily available to point out the shortcomings of the Ontario government's approach. Judges said the newspaper's focus on the unequal burden of the pandemic, hitting women, racial minorities, and lower-paid workers especially hard, was just the most striking of the many strengths of this entry, which included powerful videos and revealing interactive infographics along with comprehensive, moving written reports. The award for Project of the Year, le prix pour le projet de l'année, est décerné à Le Devoir. Well, we've been through all 22 categories, and what a fabulous collection of winners and finalists. Les félicitations sont de mise, à vous tous et toutes. Mais ce n'est pas tout à fait terminé. Il y a encore un autre prix à décerner, celui du journaliste ou de la journaliste de l'année 2020. Before we get to the final award, crowning the Journalist of the Year 2020, we have an important announcement about an issue that our industry has been grappling with. For that, we turn to the editor of the Winnipeg Free Press and chair of the NNA Board of Governors, Mr. Paul Semin.
The year 2020 was one in which newsrooms across Canada were pressed into action to cover the outpouring of anger at the murder of George Floyd. This spilled into the streets and sparked a worldwide conversation about race, systemic racism, and injustice. It was also a year in which Canadian newsrooms had to come face to face with reckoning about our own role in perpetuating and failing to combat racial injustice. The National Newspaper Awards is an important part of this country's media infrastructure, and we too have taken a long overdue look in the mirror. What we see is that our Board of Governors does not reflect the diverse nature of Canada, nor does our list of winners and finalists over the years or this year. We can't change the past, but we can take concrete steps to bring about meaningful change for the present and future. Some changes are already in motion. We are starting by revamping our governance structure to incorporate voices that should have been heard before. With their help, we will consider other changes in the coming weeks and months. We are committed to do better, to be better, and to better reflect the diversity of our country and those we serve with our journalism.
Merci, M. Semin. C'est maintenant le moment de présenter le dernier prix de la soirée. Depuis 2014, nous rendons hommage au ou à la journaliste de l'année. Nous avons créé ce prix pour honorer une personne dont le travail vraiment extraordinaire mérite une reconnaissance additionnelle. This special award has previously been given to Bruce McKinnon, Joanna Slater, Marc McKinnon, Robin Doolittle, Kevin Mitchell, and last year, Randy Richmond. Each year, we convene a panel of distinguished journalists, including past NNA winners and experienced judges, to select the Journalist of the Year from among the winning entries. The judges truly understand what it means to produce journalism at the highest level. Conséquemment, chaque année, nous rassemblons un comité de journalistes distingués, incluant d'anciens lauréats du CCJ et des juges d'expérience, pour choisir le ou la journaliste de l'année parmi les candidatures gagnantes. Our distinguished judging panel this year consisted of Sheila North, André Pratt, and Christina Spencer. Nous les remercions pour leur formidable travail qui leur a permis de s'entendre sur le choix pour l'année 2020. And now, it is my pleasure to announce that the Journalist of the Year for 2020 is Tom Cardoso. Tom Cardoso's investigation, Bias Behind Bars, revealed that custodial risk assessments in federal prisons are systemically biased against Indigenous, Black, and female prisoners. He obtained difficult-to-access data, created sophisticated programs to analyze it, and found compelling stories about the people reflected in the numbers. Judges said the project created an important foundation on which to build a more just correctional system that deals more constructively and equitably with those convicted of crime. L'enquête de Tom Cardoso a révélé que l'évaluation des cotes de risque dans les pénitenciers fédéraux défavorise systémiquement les Autochtones, les Noirs et les femmes. Il a obtenu des données difficiles d'accès, ainsi que créé des programmes sophistiqués pour les analyser, et il a découvert des histoires captivantes concernant les personnes auxquelles se référaient les chiffres. Les juges ont dit qu'il a sérieusement jeté les bases d'un projet pour bâtir un système correctionnel plus juste qui traite de façon plus constructive et équitable les personnes condamnées. Well, there you have it. While holding an online awards ceremony makes it impossible to present Tom with the traditional golden fedora, consider it done virtually. Congratulations, Tom. Par ailleurs, félicitations à tous nos gagnants, gagnantes et finalistes. Votre travail en 2020 n'a pas été qu'exceptionnellement bon, mais il a été aussi exceptionnellement important pour les Canadiens. We will forward your certificates, and in the case of winners, your prize money in the coming days. This is Marc Denis. Thank you for tuning in. C'est Marc Denis qui vous dit l'heure de tomber respectée. Merci et à la prochaine.